All right, thanks for coming, guys. So this talk is on some work that came out of a prototyping project we did for a mobile app that really involved, one of the core pieces of it was push notifications. And so there's three pieces to this talk. There's the push notifications themselves, which I'll talk just some use cases and what push notifications are. I'm pretty sure that most of you guys are already familiar with it. Urban Airship, which is a software as a service platform that allows you to do push notifications to mobile devices, and then the Python wrapper. And the Python wrapper, I'll show a little bit of Python code. I guarantee you guys will be able to read it as developers, so you'll understand roughly what it's doing. And this is a talk I'm giving to DC Python in April, and I've minimize the amount of Python, and I'm talking a little bit more about the first two services. So if you want to use it with a Java wrapper or some other language wrapper, maybe there's a Groovy wrapper out there, you can do that instead. So before we get into those topics, I want to talk about why this is important, because this really sets the stage. What should you guys get out of this? Why should you pay attention to this? And we've all seen the graphs, this exponential mobile growth. One of the things that's most striking right now is that only 1/3 of US adults own a smartphone. And if you have 2/3 of the country without a smartphone, we're talking, most people already are familiar with the iPhone, the Android platform, but there's a huge swath of people out there just in the US that do not yet have smartphones. So we're seeing this from an aggregate standpoint. This in particular is AT&T's expected data volume growth at petabytes per month. And we're looking at approximately 150 billion petabytes a month that would be mobile traffic. So that's from an aggregate standpoint. Obviously, from a day-to-day standpoint, what we see is new methods of interaction for people and their phones. And it's a shame that the term personal computer has been used in past computing generations, because really this is the personal computer. When I give my phone to someone so they can make a phone call, I don't want them digging through my text messages, through my emails. It is my own personal device. And so we're seeing a one-to-one correspondence between people and their phones, and that they grow attached to them. And through this, there's a new engagement type, and it's push notifications. And the idea that there's more than just a text message, but a push notification that immediately goes right to you, and it feels, in the best case, it feels like a message that was directly targeted to you, that is relevant and timely and useful to you, and immediately sent to your mobile device, which chances are you have on you at almost every single time of the day. So that sort of sets the stage, and this is the actual content of it. First, we're going to be talking about push notifications, what they are, what they're good for, some use cases. Then we'll talk about Urban Airship, which is the technical infrastructure, the platform that can be used to send these push notifications out. And then I'll talk about Python, because I did work with actually writing some of the Python wrapper that allows you to interface with Urban Airship's RESTful API. And so we'll take a look at some of the code. And then I'll give some other additional resources. So what I want to do is set the stage so that you guys are actually interested in this. It's like, okay, this is cool. So if you happen to get on a mobile project, there's some, and enterprises are doing this. They want to send push notifications to their employees, or a consumer-facing government agency sending out push notifications to citizens that are particular to their needs. And so I think that after you see this and how pretty easy it is, there's some great links that I can show to you guys that if you're interested in this, you can dig into further. So the first we're going to talk about is push notifications. And you guys are probably already familiar with this, but on iOS 4, we had what was really just a dialog box that would pop up. So this one in particular was AP News. Push notifications originated in iOS 3, and then in iOS 4 remain roughly the same. And there was a lot of criticism around that, particularly because Android had a better way of doing push notifications, a better way of organizing them. So Apple responded to that, and they came out in iOS 5 with this factor, this form factor that you see right here, which is broken up by app, and then you have the individual push notifications organized within the apps, so that you wouldn't simply immediately be interrupted, but you would see that there's something going on. And then around the individual icons on your what's essentially your dashboard or your desktop, that you would have a little icon that would show you have one push notification or two push notifications or some message waiting for you inside that app. This is for Android. In Android, there's the app name and then a quick message and what time you received it. And then when you click on that, you're immediately brought into the app. And that brings up the app, and then the app can act on that information, which I'll actually show some Python code that'll show how that's done. So the first thing, now obviously we understand what push notifications are. They're a fairly simple concept, but what's really important is what are they good for? Because when I think of push notifications, in some cases, they're obtrusive, they're onerous. I get a message each day and I'm like, this isn't really that particularly useful to me, and I want to get rid of the app just so I don't get their push notifications. But there are some really, really great applications of this. And a lot of times it's maybe once a month or once a week, and it's relevant and it's timely information. It's not a broadcast message out to every user. It can be segmented by different types of users. So I'll show a few case studies. The first one, this is a game called Field Runners. And Field Runners, the way they use push notifications is to inform users that there's new content. So the game is essentially a tower defense game where you're trying to defend a certain piece of territory against these oncoming attackers. And once you beat the game, well, that's sort of it. But they developed all of this in-app purchasing so that you could have new maps that you could explore or new enemies and new ways to fight them. And they wanted to inform the users, particularly users who are they've already purchased the app, they're interested in it, and they wanted to inform the users that there's some new content that's out there for them to purchase. Another one would be time-sensitive discounts. This is the Living Social app, which shows you today only you can get a specific discount in some place that you can travel to, or maybe some dinner or some restaurant, someplace you can go to. So it's time sensitive because you need to subscribe to that discount within a given period of time. So instead of going home at night and realizing, oh, this expired at 5 o'clock, you get it on your phone and you immediately see, you can decide, is this something that I'm interested in or not? Politics is sort of an interesting one because you have this engagement between a party affiliation and the voters. And while this is a specific use case for the Democrats, the Republicans are doing the same thing to get out the vote, make sure that people are going to the polling stations and engaging with voters in a way that they're sending them out timely information on certain topics that are of interest in the news, or simply getting them out there so that they can volunteer for specific activities. So again, it's about creating something that's relevant to your users and making sure that what you're sending to them is not just a blanket, what could be done in a blanket email or something that's less timely, but that it's relevant and timely, and that there's something that's really going to hook them and make them interested in it. So after you figure out the appropriate use case for push notifications, how do we build the infrastructure to send them? Do you guys have any questions so far on just appropriate use cases or anything about the way that they're done? Urban Airship is a software as a service platform that allows you to build essentially a push notification. They've built the push notification infrastructure, and then you build some code around that so you can send push notifications to the users who have your app. So what's an urban airship? Because when you first read about it, you're kind of like, urban airship sounds like kind of a weird name for a company. And so I'm actually going to show a video that they have that will quickly explain what they are.
You've developed a killer app. It's the best deal-finding, social networking, music streaming, camera filter, first-person shooter app in the market. It's getting downloaded thousands of times a day, and everything's great, right? Well, not exactly. While a zillion downloads is cool and all, the truth is most people stop using an app within about a month. So let's talk about push notifications. You know, those little alerts your apps send whenever cool stuff happens. Push notifications keep users engaged. So maybe it's time to start using them in your apps. Good idea, right? But it's going to take time and resources, time you could be spending on your actual app, rather than hassling with complex protocols and more code. Not to mention the money you'll spend on server infrastructure. All this just to get people using your app more. Wouldn't it be nice if somebody did all that work for you? That's where Urban Airship comes in. They power the world's most successful apps, offering turnkey solutions that work across most mobile platforms, making it easy to add push notifications to your app. They can even set up an inbox that allows you to deliver rich media content from push. They also make it simple to offer in-app purchasing and subscriptions, all while tracking and measuring the success of your app. Setup is fast and easy. Now you can spend more time doing what you do best, making your deal finding, social networking, music streaming, camera filter, first-person shooter even better.
Urban Airship works across multiple platforms to essentially provide you the push notifications to different devices. And the one that I was focused on in particular was the iOS and then the Android. So out of that video, we see a few things. One is that building the infrastructure actually is very time consuming. I mean, they've taken care of not only doing all that, but ensuring that it's scalable. You really wouldn't want to have to investigate, and I'm going to go over the different protocols. You wouldn't want to have to go and investigate and really understand the protocols of every single different platform that you're developing for, and then putting out the infrastructure. Sure, you could spin it up on Amazon, but chances are it's going to be a lot cheaper, a lot easier, a lot less time consuming in order to just use Urban Airship, or there's a few other services that are out there. But Urban Airship right now is really the leader in the space, and that's why I focused on them. So the first is the Apple Push Notification Service, and this came out in iOS 3 and then has essentially continued. The infrastructure itself has continued to stay relatively the same over the past few generations so the iOS, the way that you view the iOS push notifications from a user standpoint has changed, but from the back end, it's really stayed roughly consistent. Android C2DM stands for Cloud to Device Messaging Framework, and this is Android's version of the Apple Push Notification Service. This came out originally with Android 2.1, and Urban Airship has a way to support push notifications to Android devices on 1.6 and 2.0. There's a certain workaround that they have. But for the most part, about 95% of Android devices are on 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, and there's very limited penetration into the 4.0 category, but that's just starting to appear, and this also works with that as well. So if you're trying to hit about 95% of the market for Android phones, you can go with this safely, and C2DM is going to be supported on those phones. If you have much older phones that you have to support for some reason, then there is a way, there's a special library that they would have to put on their phone in order for them to receive push notifications. The other thing to note about this is it works through the Android Marketplace, I guess now the Android Play. The user has to have an account because the account is what you send the notifications, the notifications are routed through an account and then they appear on a phone, and that's how they do that in the background. There's also Blackberry Push service, and I really have limited experience in this. I've signed up for it. I've tried it a little bit. We thought we were going to potentially support the BlackBerry platform, but the people talk a lot about Android fragmentation, but there's actually a lot of BlackBerry fragmentation. The operating system 5, 6, and 7, I mean, they're all over the map with what they support. I mean, or at least a lot of business people have these older Blackberries that are on operating system 5, and they can support they have memory for maybe 2 or 3 apps. So the chances are that they're actually even into apps or that they've downloaded apps is actually relatively small. And 6 and 7 got better and they've had more capabilities, but the market penetration just really isn't there. So it's one of those things where if you have an enterprise product and you're on BlackBerry, you may have to support it, but from a consumer standpoint, it's unlikely that BlackBerry is really going to be your target platform. I note Windows Mobile because they do not have currently Urban Airship does not support Windows Mobile. I emailed them about this and they said they'd be making some sort of announcement within Q1. It's getting close to the end of Q1, and I'm not sure if that means that they have pushed back their plans or if something else is, they're waiting to see how things develop, but currently they do not support Windows Mobile. All right, so that was a sort of a quick overview of Urban Airship. It's basically the routing, the infrastructure behind it, and it's a software as a service platform. And the other thing about it is you can send a million push notifications a month through their infrastructure without paying any cost. So it really provides a great starting point for you. And their business model is essentially, if you send more than that, then they're going to charge you some fee. based on the volume that you send, and they're also trying to hook you on their other things such as in-app purchasing or rich push notifications, which is a totally different infrastructure that they've developed. But the basic push notifications are there just essentially as a free service up to $1 million a month. So I want to go into some of the Python code, and this is something I worked on the Python wrapper, and when I was looking at Urban Airship, I thought this is a really cool platform, and then I started looking at integrating it, and what I realized is I was writing a web app in Python Django, and I needed to send push notifications from that web application out to the mobile devices. So this is where, on the server, a traditional web app, I needed to send these push notifications that were created in the user interface and send them to Urban Airship so it could do the routing out to the devices. When I looked at the Python code, they only had support for iOS, and so it's not as clean as you'll see in a minute, it's not as clean as just saying send push notifications to all devices. You do actually have to say send these push notifications to iPhone users or iOS users, send these push notifications to Android and Blackberry. So there is a little bit of segmentation in how you have to send these push notifications off. There's 3 separate pieces to the RESTful API that you have to know about, or at least that you have to that you would route the messages through. Okay, so code time. All right, so this is some example push code, and I'm going to walk through each line. So this is the code that would be on like the server. So you're developing this traditional web app, Python Django, and you have imported the Urban Airship library, and I'll actually go into a little bit of that code in a minute. But first you would have this import statement just like you would have in Java, no semicolons in Python, but you would have import Urban Airship. Now you have access to Urban Airship. And you have 2 keys. You have an app key, which is your specific app. So let's say you have multiple apps. You have an app for the Department of Defense, an app for Hilton, and you have an app for the White House or something like that. You can have separate apps that would have separate push notifications sent out to those apps. So I've stored this this is a dictionary, essentially what is a hash map. And so group name could be whatever the group name is, Department of Defense. So I want to get the application key from the Department of Defense, and now I've stored that app key. And the second piece is the master key. This is your master secret key, the one that you want to hold on to, and you don't want to publish this because this is essentially the key to your application. And you can regenerate this if something were to happen to it. And that's probably a good idea from a security standpoint to regenerate it every once in a while. But then you would go and you would get your master secret key. And once you have your app key and your master key, then you would say Urban Airship, and you would create, this is a new object, which is Airship, and you would have the app key and the master key. And this creates, now we know we need to send it to this app, and we have the proper authorization through the master key, and now we've set up this Airship to send push notifications. And this is how you would actually do that. The first is for Android, and this again is a dictionary. It's actually 2 dictionaries. There's Android is the key to another dictionary which actually contains an alert, alert being the key, and then the value is Android push notification text. And this can be, this essentially is going to be sent to Urban Airship as JSON. That's what the library takes care of, converting this into JSON, sending it to the correct URL, and then ensuring that it gets there and that any appropriate error messages are handled. So you would just do if you wanted to do a broadcast to mobile devices, Android mobile devices, you would simply do a broadcast and you would alert, and then that would pop up on the phone, Android push notification text as an alert, and it would have your app up there. Similar thing with the iOS. iOS is a little bit different. APS, Apple Push Service. You would have an alert, an iOS push notification text, and then you would broadcast that. So with this, you've just sent out a broadcast to every single one of your Android and every single one of your iOS users from your app. And that's relatively simple from a Python standpoint, and I'm sure you could do the same thing with a Java library. It would really be that easy after you've registered for the service, and you can send out push notifications. Now, devices themselves, the mobile apps, when they install your app, they register themselves with that push notification service. And so that's how, when you send out, when you do a broadcast, that's how it knows who to broadcast this message to, because the mobile app itself has been installed and has registered itself with the various push notification services. As I mentioned before, actually, you know what? This is another quick example. Sometimes when you send out a push notification, you just want it to be information. But other times, you actually want it to do something in your app. They click on it, or they point to it, and the user opens up the app, and then what, right? So you can actually send an extra piece to this. And in this case, this is the same notification text, but I've added an extra piece with an extra hash map with a URL, and then what is essentially a callback URL. So when the app opens up, it will go to this URL, and then it will pull content, right? So you can dynamically create your app based on the content that's in that. And you would do the same thing where you're broadcasting that out. And then the wrapper handles the conversion of this to JSON and then sending it on. And so when you do the import Urban Airship, essentially you're just getting this library, and here's a piece of code from that library. So we have this base URL, and so it's Go Urban Airship and their API, and then you have a broadcast URL, which is the concatenation of the base URL, and then push, and you're going to do the broadcast. And this is the broadcast method. So you define broadcast, and self is essentially a Python construct for the object itself, and then the payload. So the payload would be like this here, and the JSON, that whole piece. And then exclude tokens. So if you wanted to, in Python, you have name parameters. And so if you do not pass in any exclude tokens, you've set a default value to none. So it will just have none as the default value. If you want to pass in exclude tokens. So essentially, you don't overload methods in Python because you have name parameters. So this, you can just pass two variables in, or actually you would just pass a single variable in because self is just the object itself, and that's automatic. And you could just ignore exclude tokens. If there are any exclude tokens, then the payload itself would add exclude tokens, and then it would simply add them to the payload, and that would tell Urban Airship, do not send this. Maybe you're broadcasting out, but I don't want to send it to these certain devices. Maybe they've selected not to be a part of this, or for some reason you just don't want to send it out to a segment of the app user population. There's other ways of handling this, but broadcast is the most general. Just send out to a swath of users. So the body of the message is essentially a JSON. This is a JSON library in Python, and you would dump s is basically just takes a dictionary and then give me the JSON from that. And then here we have in Python you can have multiple return statements or multiple return responses. So in here there's a method, a private method with the underscore of request, and this private method, which is, if you want to take a look at this code, is all on GitHub, and I have the links at the end of the presentation. If you were going to take a look at this, the request method, you are sending a post. You're sending a post to the server with the body of this payload that you've sent to the broadcast URL up here, and then you're just sending it as JSON. So this request is essentially what's handling the actual sending it to the server, and it does it through. There's two ways. One is it can use the requests. There's a library called requests, which is a very elegant way of handling requests, HTTP requests in Python. And then there's a different way which actually uses the HTTP built-in library to Python to do the HTTP call. Now, when you receive your response back, you're going to receive a status code from the server, and then the actual response itself. And assuming if the response is 200, which means obviously that it's, everything went well, that you just go you just go past this. But if it's not status code equals 200, then you're going to raise this urban airship failure with the status and the response, what happened. A lot of times it's certain things like you don't have correct access privileges, maybe you pulled the wrong master secret key or something like that, or something went wrong, or maybe for some reason your internet connection went down at that moment that you were trying to send that. So you would just try to handle that failure gracefully. Questions on that piece of code? Okay. So that pretty much covers everything. That's basically an overview of some of the code that I wrote, and the push notifications and urban airship. So if you end up in a situation where you need to do push notifications, or you're looking at, well, how can I augment a mobile app to do certain features? Urban airship is a pretty decent way of at least a starting point. They've got a lot of infrastructure that's already built that can help you do a lot of these things. And they actually just did an acquisition of a company called Simple Geo. So they're going to start integrating more geolocation services into their infrastructure. So next is just where to go from here. And I have 6 links. I'll just explain them very quickly. This is the official Urban Airship API wrapper. This only contains iOS code. The second one is the fork that I wrote that has Android support, and it handles that through, if you have in your payload Android, then it will try to do send out to Android devices, and if you have APS, then it will try to send out Apple push notifications. But that's all essentially abstracted. So if you wanted to then add Blackberry, you could do that as well, or mobile, or Windows Mobile. There is a pull request on this back to Urban Airship. I did see that Urban Airship is looking for Python developers, and it seems like they've not, there's some consternation with them taking the pull requests and actually integrating them into their official library. And so there's a bunch of forks that are out there. So hopefully they can hire someone soon that will then be able to pull that code in and continue to develop the Python wrapper. The next, this is really cool. I mean, if you're just, this is a really cool article. It's geofencing with Urban Airship and Cloud9, and really interesting article, a lot of really great code. He's particularly talking about iOS, and if you're interested in geofencing, which is essentially the concept of you move outside of a certain location, it's going to send a push notification. This has an actual working code of how you would do that. Another one is just, it can be a little bit confusing. Google's directions on how you obtain tokens and what tokens mean and stuff like that would see the cloud-to-device messaging framework is a little bit confusing. I wrote a blog post on that just to make it a little bit clearer as to what exactly I did in order to get one of these tokens and when you need it. And then this is a really great tutorial on sending push notifications with Apple. And then the last thing is on GitHub, I actually have the source code to this presentation. So if you're interested in just seeing Impress.js, the whole source code is out there through this link.